So, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted to give this introduction on behalf of the board in my role of Vice President. It's a very, very important opportunity today to discuss about this environmental and positive infrastructure in our job. And I'm also, I'm from Rome, from Italy, from Rome, and I'm happy to share that we just celebrated 50 years from the report of the Club of Rome that in 1972 delivered the very important report, The Limits to Growth, that was a very comprehensive a report on the environmental friendly approach for infrastructure and for everything, and was a very important starting point for the environmental comprehension. Now, FIDIC, working in partnership with the WWF, has made an important intervention on these topics, and by this way provided this playbook. This is going to be the main item of the discussion today. And this is an effort to make possible for everyone to share knowledge and comprehension about these issues. Globally, there is the growing interest in these matters, not only in Europe, but everywhere in the world. And it's very important to share information and knowledge about that. And this is going to be the main target for this webinar, where many very brilliant speakers are going to introduce ourselves about this matter. And I would like to thank on behalf of the board all the speakers to join this webinar and to get their contribution to the discussion. I hope and I'm sure this webinar is going to be very interesting. And just to give the floor to Nelson for the introduction of the webinar as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Alfredo Ingleti, our Vice President from Italy. And it's a real pleasure to be able to join you. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. We have a fantastic numbers of speakers who are going to deliberate on this subject. The subject matter is why nature positive, need to be incorporated into where we look at infrastructure. Infrastructure is considered as one of the areas where we can reduce our carbon, and FIDIC has been playing a very key role in that particular area. Our expertise rely on our Sustainability Development Committee, which is elegantly chaired by Tracey Ryan from New Zealand, and she'll be talking to you in a bit. But just to touch a little bit about the relationship between FIDIC and WWF, it's an initiative that was kicked in by SDC about a year and a half ago, and that relationship has matured very well. I was very pleased to see that relationship blossom into the extent that we've now have this playbook produced. Playbook was launched officially in Singapore as part of the Global Infrastructure Conference, and there was a side discussion. But today we are focusing very much to do more deep dive on the subject. And it's really my pleasure to see those who contribute into the playbook, led by Tracey, the chair of the Sustainability Development Committee, and with the rest of the team, particularly our other strategic partner, AECOM, who jointly, helped to produce the document. So it's my pleasure to introduce, the team, and I'm delighted that we're actually hosting this webinar. But before I do that, a bit of a pit stop and stop about Bentley. I'm delighted to, say that we have Bentley sponsoring this particular event. Bentley Advancing Infrastructure. They're one of our strategic partners. They have been supporting us in all our webinars for the last of this year, and will continue to do that for the rest of the year. We appreciate their contribution, and we hope we can continue to work with them. So thank you very much, Bentley Advancing Infrastructure. It's my pleasure now to hand over to Tracey Ryan, who is the chair of our Sustainability Development Committee. And she's done a fantastic job over our leadership over the last few years, and I know we can always count on that. So Tracey, the floor is yours. I'm handing over to you to introduce your panel and to share with us the particular topic. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Nelson, and tena koutou koutou, everybody. I see there's many people from around the world joining us today. I'm so really delighted from that. As Nelson said, I'm joining you from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So hopefully I'll see a couple of fellow New Zealanders pop up online. Look, this is my third FIDIC webinar series, and I'm really excited today to be talking to you about the playbook. If I recall, and Robert Spence was also on the panelist today with me, that this time last year, Robert, we had launched the climate charter, and really excited now that the evolution of the work that the Sustainable Development Committee have been doing has just been phenomenal over the last couple of years. And I'd like to give a shout out to the committee in particular, the time and effort and as they kind of volunteer in and their commitment and passion around what we're all collectively doing together is amazing. So I'd just like to recognition that the team behind the scenes have done that. Look, I have a couple of minutes to really set the scene and just talk about the why the playbook, and then I'll introduce the panelists who will go into a little bit more detail around that. But one of the things in particular, Nelson, I'll draw from a lot of the conversations that we had in Singapore, really around infrastructure, as we know, is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. And, I think some of the figures that got touted around that it contributes to approximately 79% of greenhouse gas emissions, with mostly associated with energy and building and transport. And we also know that about 75% of the built infrastructure that we expect to see in 2050 does not yet exist. And so without a doubt, we're seeing that increasing recognition that the two greatest challenges that we faced around climate change and also biodiversity loss. And I do really, it was probably a point when we're in Singapore together at the FIDIC conference when Nelson played, say, David Attenborough's COP26 speech. And I know, Robert, you were there, so you're probably listening to it on the ground. But that was a moment for me in particular of really starting to kind of think and look at. We'll talk about the evolution was this before that, but if you haven't listened to David Attenborough's speech, COP26 speech, I encourage you to please listen to that. But he does talk a lot about the destruction of nature. He talks about the stability across our planet is breaking, how we're seeing the inequity and instability, and everyone will feel the impact of that across the planet. And I think we can all talk and share our experiences on this call at the moment of what we've been seeing around that in terms of those type of impacts and things like that. And he goes on to talk about the need to see the bigger picture and that we need to kind of rewrite our story, and particularly for so David, that in his 90th sort of decade, of that devastation that he's seen throughout his sort of lifetime. And he talks about this need for the new revolution, which uses nature as a key ally and uses nature to bring back the balance to our sort of planet. And, as an industry, particularly on this call, as the infrastructure industry, we know we're problem solvers and problem fixers. So we really need to start pulling things in reverse, and hence to kind of address the challenges of climate and biodiversity loss and do it in a meaningful way. So hence, I think the collaboration, I think Nelson talked and Evan will talk later on really around the collaboration and that partnerships we know as critical. And that, for FIDIC and WWF to join forces to develop this first iteration of the playbook and this nature positive infrastructure development to help drive that sort of change at such a sort of scale and within the sort of sector. And really, the intent of the playbook is to act as a tool for the supporting the implementation of nature-based solutions. And I'm sure we'll draw out some examples as the panelists kind of go through a little bit more sort of detail around this. But the whole purpose, and I'm particularly around, is that we all know we need to go beyond just reducing or mitigating impacts and towards really integrating the ecosystem viability and biodiversity and climate goals into the designs. And so the purpose really of the playbook is to provide really good examples of projects that really have relieved and relied on nature positive solutions, as a guide for infrastructure, practicalities to identify, potential solutions for projects to really reduce and drive net positive. And, I think it was a fantastic piece of work. AECOM did an amazing job, who kind of went out and the case studies around the world were kind of great examples. And we probably can go into that in a little bit more detail. But I think I'd like to just talk about the partnership. I think the partnership is the first step of kind of, bringing the global community to kind of get her at that sort of level that who can really influence and drive change. And I'm looking forward to the ongoing sort of partnership with WWF to enable that sort of thing to happen as we kind of merge on that. And maybe, Robert, you might touch about COP28 and a couple of things that we'll do collectively together. But with that in mind, because I know you don't necessarily want to hear from me, I'll come back to you later on when we're kind of going to go through the Q&A. So please use the chat function to put in your questions that might pop up, and we'll kind of go through them after all the speakers. But Lisa, I might go just to the poll question. We do have 2 poll questions. So we're going to ask your first poll question and then towards the end come back to the second one. But if you have about 20 seconds just to write into chat, so to whether has your company engaged with any nature positive infrastructure initiatives? And we'll just go through. So that's a polling, yes or no. So panelists, you can vote there. So hopefully you have time to quickly do a vote on that. Shall we leave that there? Shall we go over and I can introduce the panelists? There we go. All right. Well, that's good. Has your company engaged with nature positive? That answer just 68% yes, 32%. That's really good, actually. That's probably higher than I thought it would be. So that's fantastic to see. So look, without ado, I'm going to introduce our very esteemed group of panelists and experts and speakers. And I'll just go through it. They will speak in order for about 10 minutes each. And then after Robert, towards the end, we'll go through about 20, 30 minutes of Q&A. So as you're kind of thinking, as the panelists are speaking, please put your questions into chat, and I will hopefully do my best to moderate and get through any of the questions that you have. But so we have four speakers and panelists joining us tonight. So Evan Freund, who's our Senior Director for the Sustainable Infrastructure and Finance from WWF in the States. Thank you, Evan. I know it's quite early for you there, so really appreciate you joining us today. With Emily Cornu, who's an Associate Climate Change and Sustainability and Resilience with AECOM, who played a significant part with the development of the playbook, and then Graham Pontin, who most of you know is the Director of Policy of External Affairs and Communications from FIDIC. And then we have Robert Spencer, who's the Global Lead for ESG Advisory AECOM, and also who is a Deputy Chair with me as part of the FIDIC Sustainable Development Committee. So I will hand over to Evan. So Evan, I think you're going to probably just talk a little bit just around the partnership, how it kind of came about, and a couple of just kind of open remarks and comments around that, around the relationship between FIDIC and WWF. And you can probably take us back to the start a couple of years ago.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tracey, for the introduction, and greetings, everybody. It's really great to be here, and it's fantastic to see so many people on this webinar. It's a reflection of the fact that I think there's a lot of interest, as you rightly noted, Tracey and others, in this growing idea around nature positive approaches to infrastructure, and more broadly and more generally to sustainability and sustainable infrastructure in general. So I do want to spend a little time talking about this partnership between WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and FIDIC. But let me just back up and start with something that may not be totally obvious to everybody on this call: why WWF as a conservation organization is even in the dialogue about infrastructure development and sustainable infrastructure. And we are arguably the largest global conservation organization, representing over 100 countries with more than 7,000 employees globally. And as a conservation organization, we've really long been challenged by this idea of sustainable infrastructure, and both the threats and the opportunities really that infrastructure presents in the context, as you rightly noted, Tracey, of both climate change and biodiversity loss. So today, now we're really faced with this opportunity of looking at how infrastructure is developed, how it's financed, how it's deployed. And I should say our partnership with FIDIC as the leading membership organization for the engineering community globally really presents this fantastic opportunity to push on a super important and very much shared agenda. And that agenda, again, is sort of reimagining and redefining how infrastructure is developed and deployed globally. So we were thrilled a little over 2 years ago, as you noted, Tracey, to begin conversations with the Sustainable Development Committee, who approached WWF really in the context of the climate charter that FIDIC were at the very front end of putting together, and thinking about how our two organizations might get together to promote this concept of net zero for the engineering community. And the dialogue really has blossomed from there to something I think far greater than either organization perhaps imagined 2 years ago when we began talking. And again, the two issues are totally interlinked: climate change and biodiversity loss. One cannot be addressed without the other, and infrastructure is really at the heart of a lot of the issues embedded within those two challenges. So our relationship emerged as a function of that conversation, and we quickly, I think, came to the conclusion that the industry was really feeling the need for some new insight, some additional thinking maybe into this concept, this emerging concept of nature positivity and nature positive approaches to infrastructure, moving beyond what I think is well known and well recognized in the industry of mitigating or avoiding loss, but thinking about how to introduce really in novel ways concepts to revive nature or bring biodiversity net gain even, or nature positive nature gains into the infrastructure development process. And around those conversations, the concept of this playbook emerged. And as Tracey noted at the outset of the call, the playbook, in my opinion, certainly is meant to be a bit of a novel approach. It's really here for the engineering community to use as an active product to help guide and inform and really inspire engineers as they think about how to develop and how to deploy new approaches to infrastructure. We approach this opportunity both humbly, but also with a whole lot of ambition. We recognize that there's certainly material out there in the world related to nature-based solutions and nature positive approaches, but I think we quickly recognized that perhaps there hadn't been a handbook or a guidebook that was really of practical use for the engineering community specifically to help think about how to put these approaches into practice going forward. So our goal was to put out a product that's useful for this community that's here today, to receive feedback and input from both the conservation communities and the engineering communities about best practices, and perhaps most importantly, to approach it as a dynamic document, to approach it as a living document. Our goal in producing this document, and frankly, our goal with this partnership with FIDIC, is to keep addressing these issues related to biodiversity conservation, nature conservation, and climate change. And the playbook represents a first version, kind of a beta version, if you will, to address some of these issues, receive feedback from all of the folks who are on the phone today and others within this community about what works and what doesn't, to present some cases and examples of how nature positive approaches are really injected into infrastructure development and build from that. So this is the front end in many respects of a relationship and an opportunity that I see really has no back end. It's the foundation of a platform that I think can do really a tremendous amount of great work and great thinking together. There's no uniformity around the definition of nature positive yet. I think the communities are coming together around what that looks like and what that means. And again, this playbook is meant to be an additive product in this space. So I should just say we're so pleased as a conservation organization to be working with FIDIC. We have a global reach. FIDIC has a global reach and a fantastic reputation. It truly is the industry setter, and I really believe that the power of this partnership will allow us to advance on an important issue like sustainable infrastructure and nature positive infrastructure. So I just want to close by maybe thanking the Sustainable Development Committee for its leadership, guidance, and thinking around this. Certainly to AECOM, who's been a tremendous partner to both organizations in taking an idea and putting it on paper and creating the playbook that I hope many of you will download and read today. And finally, maybe to present a call to action here. We have 126 participants, it looks like, on the phone. Presumably, most of you work in some facet or another in the engineering community. As I noted, the playbook is a first version. We have a very ambitious plan and agenda to create many more versions moving forward. Its utility will be driven by the contributions of people like you. We hope to receive more cases. We hope you'll read it, download it, poke some holes in it, and tell us what works for you and what doesn't work for you, so that version 2.0 may reflect some more best practices in the industry. I think there's a lot of great work to do, and you all who are on the front lines of designing and developing infrastructure globally are the ones who will make this playbook a powerful and helpful product for the world. So again, thank you to FIDIC. We have an ambitious, as I said, agenda with FIDIC that moves beyond just the development deployment of this playbook, and we can talk about that a bit more later on. But again, it's a real pleasure to be working with FIDIC and AECOM on the development of this document. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Tracey. Back to you.
Tracey, you're muted.
Am I unmuted? Oh, look at you. Should know after several years I should have this right, shouldn't I? I should have a fine or something for doing this. But Evan, I was saying it was lovely to hear that comment about having a whole lot of ambition, because we know the reality of what we're all faced with, and kind of seeking these sort of solutions we're looking through. That ambition is ultimately key. And so with that, Emily, I'm going to hand over to you, because I think you can talk about the ambition and how that kind of came to life with the development of the playbook. I know you had a key involvement with that right from the start. So it would be great to kind of hear from your perspective.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. And hello to everyone on the call. It's a pleasure to be here. As Tracey said, we were the authors of this document, kind of working with FIDIC and WWF in the development. And what I want to do is just kind of spend a bit of time now just kind of talking you through the methodology that we followed, and also talking over the structure of the document as well, to help those who maybe haven't had a chance to look at the document kind of understand the kind of what it's all about and what we're aiming to present. I think we'll be sharing a link to the document in the chat shortly, but also it's publicly available on FIDIC's website. So please do go and download it and have a flick through. So how we started off kind of with this document, we spent a lot of time with WWF and FIDIC kind of like brainstorming kind of the angles of how we want to present the information. And what we kind of boiled down to was, and we felt the best approach to present the information was on a sector benefit solutions approach. So we undertook quite a detailed analysis of, I think, around 500 projects, of which kind of only around 200 were really identified as real solid examples or solutions that we could include that met our definition of nature positive infrastructure. So this review was taken from kind of academic articles, from reports, from project websites, media articles, a whole variety of sources, just to try and gather as much information as possible. Because what we felt before kind of the launch of the start of the playbook, there wasn't a document that really kind of pulled together all this information in one place that almost helped act as a signpost to the practitioners, the engineers, the designers that would be using this document. And I suppose if there's one thing to kind of take away, it's kind of what this document aims to do is to help. And I think Evan kind of put it really nicely, is like help kind of like change the mindset, or kind of help change the way of thinking of and how we design infrastructure in the future. So it's almost like it's the guide to kind of go to see what other and alternative solutions are available, rather than the kind of traditional grey infrastructure that we have relied on in the past. So we developed the structure, and the document only has a couple of chapters, but we start off with an introduction. And here we basically set the scene of the document. We outline kind of what our definitions are, because as Evan said, there's no kind of common definition of nature-based solutions or nature-positive infrastructure at the moment. But we thought it was quite important to state right from the onset kind of what we define as in and out of this document. And we also kind of provide a guide as to kind of how the document can be used, and to help the user, the reader, to understand kind of why we've presented the information under the different lenses of sectors, benefits, and solutions. So the sectors chapter, what we identified was the project solutions kind of broadly fell under the overarching kind of sector categories of transport, energy, water and wastewater, building public places, and also coastal protection. Now, we also kind of identified that, you know, someone coming up or wanting to identify a solution from a transport perspective, you know, might not be interested in rail, but might more be interested in roads. So we developed this typology. So as you go through the document, and you'll see within each of the subheadings under the sectors chapter, the typology kind of breaks down to help the user kind of identify the solution that is of particular interest to them within the sector's kind of subcategories. And yeah, so the document basically synthesizes the analysis of the 200 plus projects that we reviewed, and presents the different solutions under these sector and subsector categories. What we also identified was that, you know, practitioners, designers might be coming at the angle trying to identify kind of what the benefit is. So that's what the next chapter's on. So it's presenting kind of very similar information, but almost kind of it's changing the angle and the approach that you would use the document. So it's looking at it from a solutions perspective, from a benefits perspective. And here the key benefits that we tried to draw out were those on biodiversity, carbon, and also resilience. There are also kind of additional benefits that we try to kind of capture within this sector as well, that we're focused on environmental, economic, and also social. And then finally, the last chapter presents the information from a solutions perspective. So it splits it by coastal and marine, and also inland and urban, but it presents the information on all of the different solutions under those two subcategories, for the user to go and find out more detail. So the idea of presenting the same information from the three angles is basically trying to help meet the different users' needs of the document. And what we finish up on is presenting our key findings from the research, having spent a number of months kind of looking into the literature, which Robert's going to kindly take us through a little later on. So that was our main aim, was to present the information in multiple ways to help those using the document find the information that they need. And as Evan mentioned, like, this is very much version number 1, step 1, live document. You know, we are really excited that it will continue to be better, and, you know, projects may be removed because it will have to improve as new and innovative ideas are identified, that we can include in future iterations. And I think this will continue to be a live document forevermore, because I think it'll be quite sad if it ever becomes a static document. But yeah, I think they were the main things I wanted to cover. But more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session later on. Oh, Tracey.
I'm going to do this all night, aren't I? I'm just kind of going on mute. Emily, look, thank you for that. And I, you know, again, I acknowledge, you know, the work that you and your colleagues and things did. There is a question there, but I think we'll pick it up in the Q&A, right? Because I think there's comment to say just around, you know, particularly around how the engineers perceive this, right? Rather than just this is a document for ecologists or the conservative, you know, and conservationists and things like that. So maybe we can probably talk a little bit in Q&A around how this is playing out through design, how it's going to, you know, building, construction and things like that, and how it is translating through into the built engineering type world, and some of those sort of solutions and things that we're talking about. But let's maybe pick that up conversation in the Q&A. So I think, Graham, I am handing over for you, and probably the man with statistics, and who can talk a little bit more around how the playbook has been received, but also a little bit around, you know, how it's fitting into some of the broader FIDIC initiatives as well.
Thank you. Yes, so to start with some statistics on the actual playbook itself, it launched in September publicly at the Global Infrastructure Conference. It's already been seen by over 6,000 people. It's already been read by nearly 5,000 people, and it's been downloaded over 1,000 times. And the trend continues to be actual one of engagement moving forward. It doesn't appear to be slowing down. So that is encouraging. To turn around and look at the playbook in the context of the wider FIDIC initiatives, as people know from the State of the World webinars, I love my countdown to 2030 and 2050. So we've got only 2,200 days roughly to the SDGs, and we've got approximately 9,000 days until net zero. Now that might sound like a lot, but actually by the time you take weekends out and holidays out and various other things, actually that's not a lot of time to deliver the sort of infrastructure that we've got to deliver. Now, let's put it in the context of the initiatives that are running alongside the playbook and why the playbook is a vital part of it. So at the Global Leadership Conference in April and at the Global Infrastructure Conference, a number of pieces of research were launched by FIDIC that fit around the playbook, and it forms a part of. The first one was a piece with EY on the scale of the challenge we've got. Now, if you take the sort of statistics I just gave you and the fact that we need to turn around and implement nature positive solutions, the first piece of research revealed that we need to spend 139 trillion by 2050 to turn around and hit net zero. At the moment, we are not spending anywhere near that amount. We roughly need to double the amount of expenditure on infrastructure between now and 2030, and then it needs to continue consistently to 2050 to implement these solutions. So the scale of this challenge is significant, and it is very important. Hence the reason that alongside the scale of the challenge document, we presented three other things that run alongside the playbook are important. The first one is on the concept of carbon balance sheets and how you measure carbon through projects. So effectively, do you move towards a more accounting type approach? What does a good project look like? How do you turn around and, for example, price things like nature, biodiversity? Because if you can't turn around and price things, it's hard to work out the risk on them. It's hard to get investors involved in them. So that starts to look at the actual accounting mechanism. The second one was the actual measurement of carbon itself and the different scope levels that currently exist, with scope 3 and the embedded carbon at the moment sort of not causing issues, but not being aligned across the various sectors of the globe. So actually trying to turn around and get best practice and alignment. And then the playbook very much fits into it as the practitioner's document and as the tool that people can use to help move this forward. And as we said, we turn around and look at this as a living document. What is good now may not be good in 5 years' time, and will probably definitely not be good in 10 years' time. This needs to evolve as we move forward. And so these things in their combined entirety show the scale of the shift that we've got to have. Now, I'm proud to say that FIDIC, all of this research and initiative and it going to the Global Leadership Forum came out of the development of the Climate Charter, which the FIDIC board approved, and from the developments of the Sustainable Development Committee and WWF when we started this journey. So you can see that the journey and the playbook that we're presenting today is not just singular, it's part of a macro moving down into the technical and actually pushing the sector and challenging the sector to move forward all in one step, be it from investors, insurers, engineers, because we are all going to have to work together to meet this challenge, because there really is not that much time. And I'll hand back over to you, Tracey.
Yeah, I pressed the right button. I love that ending right, not much time. We always talk about the sense of urgency. You quoted a countdown for us for Sustainable Development Goals. And if I recall, Sir David Attenborough's speech, which he gave in in Glasgow, I think he quoted, what, 414 parts per million of how much we were in terms of CO2 levels. And I believe I was just about to look while you said that, but I think we're somewhere up about 421 or 423 or something about today. So we certainly haven't responded to his call of action, Evan, you know, in terms of where we need to be 2 years ago, and certainly have a lot of work to do. So look, with that, I am now going to hand over to Robert. Robert, you know, you've been a backbone for this for many years, and you know, as we kind of came into the committee 3 years ago, you know, a lot of the brainstorming around ideas of what we were very ambitious, again using that term, of what we could do, and kind of, you know, the work, I think particularly from the committee has done, you know, has been fantastic in terms of how we kind of put climate charter and really that evolution, as I said, Edwin, you know, those conversations probably several years ago, which we started, and then kind of sat in a room together in Geneva, and then kind of that. And Robert, you've been instrumental behind that, so it'd be great if you kind of can talk, you know, around your kind of key takeaways of it, you know, the review of the sort of the project itself, if we described it in that way, and really kind of maybe you can stimulate some thoughts for people as we lead into the Q&A after that. So Robert, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Tracey. Certainly will follow up on those points you've raised there. So I think for the 10 minutes that I'll talk around the playbook, I'll focus on sort of 3 mini sections, if you like. In a minute, I'll go through the key messages that we learned from developing the playbook, and you know, where there are gaps, and how we need to move on. So you know, everyone's, in particular Evan and Emily, have talked about this being a live document, and so what did we, you know, if we could do it again right now, what bits would we include that we hadn't been able to include in the first round? So I'll talk to that a little bit as well. That will be the sort of the future sections. And then I'll finish up with as you asked, Tracey, with just some thoughts on how we want to highlight this work at COP28, how it will feed into a very important theme that seems to be running through COP28, and that sort of started off really strongly in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where I saw for the first time nature being really prominent as a solution and a benefit within the climate negotiations and the climate action that so many initiatives are proposing. So I think, you know, very much nature's time has come, and it's only right, therefore, that we are taking the initiative within the infrastructure and engineering consultancy arena to really integrate that into our work on a daily basis. And that's one of the challenges, really, because our engineering community very much wants to see worked examples, wants to see technical specifications of natural assets or nature systems in a way that you might want to think about engineering assets as well, you know, typical grey infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So how can we, and I'm an environmental specialist, so how can we, coming from the environmental practices, help create data and metrics and performance understanding around natural systems in a way that engineers can use and feel confident using? And so that brings me into the key messages of the playbook. And that is that, you know, number one message, nature positive infrastructure development is clearly high on the agenda at a strategic level, right? A lot of people are talking about it. It's very much a topic of conversation. It's something that consultants in our world are offering advice on. And we do have a lot of experience in the engineering and environmental consulting sector of working with nature. You know, we've got field experts coming out of our ears, but that challenge of actually integrating natural systems into infrastructure design, there isn't so much out there, as we discovered when we were researching the playbook, of really good worked examples from start to finish, right through the project lifecycle, of where natural systems have really been integrated into the infrastructure process design, right through the master planning, engineering design, and into project implementation. and where a good record has been kept of that, so that we know how the natural assets perform in sync with the hard infrastructure assets and how that works. So, as many of us have said on this call already, we are at the beginning of a journey, and we're only, frankly speaking, in the last 5 years at the point where we've been able to conceptualize natural assets in a way that allows the infrastructure industry to incorporate them, because we have understanding around, well, what can this nature asset do with respect to air quality? What can this nature asset do with respect to water retention? What can this nature asset do with respect to improving water quality or carbon sequestration? Now, in the parlance of our natural capital and ecosystem services experts, these are all ecosystem services. And they're the functions of the natural capital assets that we want to try and bring into the infrastructure solutions that we're designing going forward. So, as Emily actually hinted at in her piece, we originally had about 500 projects that we thought, whoa, great, we've got a huge amount of meta-analysis that we can do on this. But we quickly filtered off 300 of them because they weren't really good enough for a detailed review of what the infrastructure solution could be that derives from that nature-based asset. So there is a lot of work to do. So the first thing is, how do we, moving into the second piece there, there's a lot of interest in nature-based solutions, and there are certain typical nature-based solutions that are well known and well understood. And I think everyone will have heard of sustainable urban drainage systems or drainage systems involving natural assets such as reed beds, which help polish or reduce water pollution coming out of water treatment works or things like that. There are quite a few well-established nature-based solutions, but there are a lot more out there that I feel, and I think our research has shown, haven't been effectively calibrated enough in terms of their performance, but we can bring them in to offer other aspects of infrastructure benefits. So, for example, perhaps around air quality. Another area where we have got some good examples, of course, is carbon sequestration. We know that nature is one of the best ways of capturing carbon quickly and locking it in for many years and hopefully generations to come. So there's a good amount of work around that. What we are seeing is that our infrastructure clients are wanting to layer on or create a stack of services with their infrastructure. So you've got carbon sequestration associated with the infrastructure, to come back to Graham's point about a balance sheet of carbon for infrastructure projects. Nature can play a big part in delivering that. But then you've also got the biodiversity. And we know that natural systems don't usually do well with infrastructure cutting across them and breaking them up into smaller pieces and so on, because animals and flowers and trees and such can't move around and extend themselves as they used to. So how do you think about corridors? How do you think about following the infrastructure footprint in a way that's going to enhance the natural system? So there's a lot more work needs to be done around that. And that brings me to the third point, really, which is that in order for our infrastructure engineers to fully integrate natural systems into the design process, there needs to be more work done by the environmental and ecological specialists to help create those ecological data points that the engineers can drag in, just like they would for a building information model, which is how a lot of design work gets done these days. How do you create a digital twin of the natural world so that you can bring those natural assets in to sit amongst the hard infrastructure assets and work effectively together? And so that while your infrastructure asset, your hard infrastructure asset, is delivering what it needs to deliver in terms of perhaps power generation or water filtration, you've also got your natural asset working alongside that. And we know exactly how that's going to perform. We know exactly what it's cost to put in, and we know exactly how long it will last before it needs, another look. And it's those quantification and measurement pieces that I'll come on to in the future chapters. And so the sort of final fourth key message to take away is, don't stop thinking about good examples that we can send in. I think probably sometime next year, we'll be looking at a whole bunch of new case studies that we might want to include in version 2.0 of the playbook, and have that in mind, that if you're looking through the playbook and you're thinking, well, they could have included that example there. I've heard that worked really well, and that's not just, you know, a pipe dream. We don't want pipe dreams. We don't want conceptual stuff that hasn't been done on the ground. We want proof of implementation in our case studies. Okay, so that's another key message that I'd take to you to think about. You know, let's not have concepts. Let's have actual delivered solutions that we can include in the case studies, because that's what gives people confidence, and that's what reduces risk, and that means that nature solutions are more likely to get invested in. Which brings me on to the future chapters. And I think these will fall around the areas that we've sort of been focusing on. So standardization. Okay, we already talked a little bit about definitions at the beginning. You know, what's the difference between nature positive and biodiversity net gain and nature-based solutions and such. These are areas that are quite technical, that if you're not a specialist in the nature and ecosystem services field, you'll have to do your homework and get to grips with that. We need to make that easy for the engineering sector to work with those terms and be clear about what we're talking about. So there's a job of work to do there. We think the next version of the playbook would include a chapter on standardization. And I think that would not include just the terminology of standardizing the terminology, but also standardizing some of the nature positive functions that we can expect to see, following Emily's point about solutions and benefits according to different sectors or types of infrastructure, that typology. Can we go further on standardizing what some of those solutions and benefits are according to infrastructure asset type, so that, again, we have a really good sort of basket of approaches that we can bring to different infrastructure developments that will maximize the nature positive outcomes. Linked to that very strongly is procurement. Clients won't feel confident procuring or including nature-based solutions or nature-positive infrastructure ambitions in their engineering specifications that they want consultants to bid for if they themselves aren't clear on what a standard procurement process could be for that nature-positive infrastructure. So there's also an area of work, and I think this would probably be a future chapter as well, that needs to be done around being clearer, drawing on that standardization and being clearer around what the scope of work can be, what can be some of those key procurement pieces that become a bit more standardized and then find their way more easily into our client specifications, so that we, the consultancy arm, can respond back really well with that and have a really good match with the client's expectations. And not only that, be able to deliver stuff that actually works and follows through on its performance requirements. And I think that links through into the piece that Graham was talking about as well, and Evan, in terms of investment. So if we know what we're clear about in our terminology and what the performance of the natural assets would be and how to procure them, then investors will flood in. The money will find a safe place to go, and we'll start to see more green infrastructure and nature positive infrastructure being financed in that way. And I think that also cuts across into some of these areas where we've already seen really good commentary from people who've had a good look through the playbook already. One of the feedbacks that I got when we launched it in Singapore at the AECOM office, actually, for a client event, was the offsetting piece actually needs to be consistent across all the infrastructure asset types. And that's going to rely on really good natural capital accounting, because you can't offset anything until you know what you're accounting for from the natural system point of view. Or to Graham's point about monetization, you can't put a price on the natural capital asset and include it in the accountancy and the balance sheet for the infrastructure asset, unless you've got a really good understanding of what the natural capital asset should be priced at. So that all falls together. So I think there's a piece that we need to look at in future around monetization and accounting, and how that then perhaps feeds into the offsetting piece as well. So just to finish off, COP28 is coming up end of this month. It kicks off in Dubai. It runs until the 12th of December. And there will be quite a few key opportunities that we'll be mentioning the playbook and actually using it as a way of driving forward the agenda of nature positive infrastructure. So there's a significant youth and practitioners event happening on the 6th of December in the lunchtime period, where we'll be looking at catalysts for behavior change in science-based policy. That will have a piece on this very playbook and how that can be a useful foundation for including that in policy decision making. Later that day, also on the 6th, we've got Unlocking a Nature Positive Built Environment with the Climate Champions, and that will be sitting alongside another publication that's come through from the UN and WBCSD, a more higher level approach to nature positive, complementing our sector-based and infrastructure-specific approach that we're getting into. So, and finally, I think there's a Buildings Pavilion event on Nature Day on the 9th. As many of you know, COP's divided into sort of themed days, and the 9th is the nature themed day. We'll also be running an event on that day where we'll highlight the FIDIC climate charter and playbook. I think that's all the elements that I wanted to cover, but forgive me if I've missed anything, and back to you, Tracey.
Well, thank you, Robert. And look, we're starting to get some questions coming through, which is fantastic. First, look, there's a comment here, and you know, anyone can probably put up their hand or shout in who wants to take it. But Abdel mentioned, and Robert, I think you sparked something about BIM 70 or actually green BIM. Could be a solution. And I have to give Evan, we have to give a shout out to Kate Newman. So Kate sneakily is online, and for everyone who doesn't know, Kate is the Vice President of the Sustainable Infrastructure and Public Sector Initiatives at WWF, and has been a big part of this playbook right from the start with Evan from WWF. So Kate, we'll give you a big shout out, right? And we hope you're well. But Kate put in the comments around love the green BIM idea or Robert's suggestion of digital twin for natural assets. What are the next steps of these ideas? And Emily, you do talk about, you know, you talk in your speech about we need creative and innovative and all different types of ideas. So I'm not quite sure who would like to, or many of you could take that question. I'm just going to go. Robert, you sparked it.
Yeah, well, I can certainly kick off, and I'm sure others have got thoughts on this as well. I mean, this is very much the next thing that needs to happen. AECOM does have some bragging rights here now, so I'll just very briefly mention those to get it off my chest. We've invested in a natural capital laboratory up in Scotland for the last few years, where we've been doing just what Kate talks about, trying to use geospatial remote sensing techniques to digitize natural assets from afar, so labor-saving approaches as well, and then try to include those in infrastructure solutions. So it's still early days. There's still a lot of work to do around that, but many of our clients in the infrastructure sector, and I'm sure this is the same for all our peers as well, Tracey, you'll be seeing this with Aurecon too. The infrastructure clients want to understand how to account for the natural assets adjoining and linking their infrastructure. And, you know, we've got to come up with, our sector's got to come up with the goods there. So we have got to work fast to digitize these natural assets, create those databases, and then create those user interfaces where we can help our clients understand how to integrate nature much more effectively into the infrastructure design process. And I think that's ongoing. It comes back to some of my points around, you know, how do we capture those nature data points, and then once they've been captured, they can be more easily integrated into the infrastructure design process by our fellow engineers. I think it will be, the future will be digital in that sense to a great extent, but I would like to hear from my colleagues on that as well on the panel.
I'll just add, I mean, I agree with Robert, and the point about it being digital is a key one. One of the things that is being looked at in the Global Leadership Forum and forms part of the agenda for the April summit that's coming up is not only technology, but artificial intelligence and how it affects not only the business models of companies and how they operate, but actually also how it can turn around and improve value add. So things like including natural capital and including in sort of sustainable solutions. These are things where actually a combination of technology and engineering, I think, is going to be the proviso of unlocking the journey to net zero. I don't think we're going to do it unless we embrace things like that going forward.
Thanks, Graham. Evan, I might point this because, you know, again, Robert, you said that nature positive is high on the agenda, right? And it's quite clear it fundamentally is, but at the same time, and Emily, if you're going through the work, right, we know we really struggle to find really good practical solutions, which are really happening on the ground. So there's kind of a question here of what do the panelists think is key to increase the take-up of nature positive solutions for infrastructure? I don't know, Evan, if you want to take that.
Sure, thanks, Tracey. Let me take a stab at it, and hopefully others will contribute. Maybe to hone in on a couple of points that both Emily and Robert have made. The first is absolutely getting some additional clarity on standardization and definitional clarity. There's a lot of noise, and it's mostly good noise about terminology in this space. Nature-based solutions takes on a slightly different definition depending upon representatives from the sector who you ask about what it means. And generally speaking, the concept of nature positivity is very much evolving, and I think that's. It's great that there's robust conversation about it, but without a real clarity on these definitional questions, I think it's sort of inhibiting the sector a little bit. And again, that's something we've tried to achieve in the playbook, and certainly not pushing for a totally concrete definition, but providing some additional clarity on what nature positive approaches really look like in order to lend a little more confidence to the sector and to stimulate some project development in this regard. Secondly, with respect to investors, and we spend a lot of time in talking to the investment community, and infrastructure has always been a very I think choice sector in which the investment community participates. Nature positive approaches and nature-based solutions are still very much kind of niche and bespoke and not wholly integrated. And I think demonstrating the financial benefits of investing, as Robert noted, will lend additional confidence to the investment community. I think investors are keen to put capital into infrastructure, into nature-positive infrastructure, into nature-based solutions, but we have to do collectively a better job of demonstrating the financial benefits and the returns on those investments. And I think we'll start to see money moving off the sidelines or moving away from the traditional gray infrastructure. But to date, there just hasn't been a tremendous amount of documentation around really quantifying those benefits and actually modeling from an economic financial standpoint what those benefits actually are. There's some great work being done in that regard, but it needs to be captured in a better way. And then procurement, and I wrote procurement down with an exclamation point next to it on my notes as Robert was speaking. It's something we spend a lot of time at WWF talking about, and we're together with an audience who thinks about procurement all the time. I really truly believe that unless some of these principles are codified in contractual documents, unless tender processes are changed to really incorporate sustainability principles, frankly, in a way they just haven't been in the past, we're not going to see a wholesale shift in the way infrastructure is developed and deployed. I think about the opportunity, frankly, to put all my FIDIC colleagues on the spot of sort of greening the rainbow of FIDIC of contracts, right, and doing a thorough review of the suite of FIDIC contracts to really incorporate and include language around nature positive approaches, so that this doesn't become a nice to have, it becomes a necessity or an integral piece of the FIDIC contracts. Because once you move into that regard, you're really capturing the benefits. So those would be the 3 points that I think can really help us move from theory to practice.
Evan, thank you. And look at you, you've now sparked. Oh, Nelson, sorry, you have put up your hand, so I will go to you. I don't think we can hear you, Nelson. You're coming through jumbled. We'll attempt. He's gone. He'll come back. We'll go another question just in case. Evan, you sparked.
One
sorry,
point.
Emily. Yes, go ahead.
No, sorry. Just one kind of point out, which I think the kind of leaning on one of the points that Robert mentioned is kind of one of the lessons learned as well. Yes, we need to incorporate it into the procurement. We need to identify kind of alternative ways to kind of investment community to kind of like help them understand the opportunities to de-risk them. But it's actually, I think, one of the pieces is missing right at the start of this puzzle, and it's what those solutions are. We've got a number that are we've got a number of kind of well-trodden paths, to take us down the kind of the SUDS, the sustainable urban drainage systems, but there are kind of other solutions that haven't been identified yet. And it's trying to work, and I don't have the solution, so maybe I can open up to the floor, and anyone on the call today who has any great ideas to try and help unlock this. But it's trying to help give engineers and designers the time to come up with these innovative solutions that can then be trialed, tested, shared, and then replicated in other parts of the world, or within the same geography. And it's making sure that opportunity is given at the start to help come up with what these solutions could be in areas that don't have them at the moment. Because as you'll see from the playbook, there are some sectors that we've been able to identify quite a number of projects and solutions that could be used, but then there are some sections that aren't as full. I was trying to not use a negative word. Yeah, so it's trying to kind of like help give our designers, engineers that time, help our clients understand the need to invest this time as well to come up with these new solutions, because that's what will help bolster, increase, and improve the playbook in future iterations. And that's one of the kind of big gaps as well that we see, and that needs to be unlocked quite quickly. Sorry, Nelson, you had your hand up.
Yeah. That's okay, Nelson.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Absolutely. Thank you. Apology for that. I need to debug the risk in my system. Well, I was just going to build on Evan's comment about looking through FIDIC contract. We are already on to that. Evan, I got good news for you. We've been talking extensively with the World Bank, with the Inter-American Development Bank, and EBRD. Most of the MDB, they are talking to us because, one, they've adopted the FIDIC contract globally for all projects funded by them. Secondly, they've now gone into what I call this soft sustainability issue in their procurement process, so that they can actually take on board the issue about sustainability in their procurement requirement. And we are also working with the World Bank contract team to look at every clauses in the FIDIC contract to make sure we green them. We have a dedicated task group at the moment, which is looking after all our contracts. And we had a workshop in Geneva this year where we have a task force for 3 days looking through all the contracts. So the good news is that we hope by this time next year, we'll have a sort of a green agenda contract coming out. And that would be fantastic news that the banks are looking forward to that. So we are already on that case, Evan. We're really on that case. And
Nelson, music to my ears. That's wonderful to hear. And let us know how we can participate.
Absolutely. Once you got that going, at the good side, this will be supplementary our standard contract, looking through all varieties of our contract, the design will be PPP on all the contract, making sure they're absolutely green. So we are working on it. And I'll make sure that we bring you on board. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tracey.
Thank you. And Tracey, if you don't mind, Nelson, if I could piggyback on something Nelson said, but it's worth illustrating. Nelson, again, thank you. That's wonderful news. And I think this community knows well too. Just going back to the comment about finance and mobilizing finance, the regulatory environment around the world is changing. There's now more than ever a need to demonstrate in portfolios how ESG criteria are being adhered to, and those have to be reported upon. So again, this sort of nice to have versus must have paradigm is totally changing, and regulation is obviously a very powerful motivator here. So I'd like to think that coupled with this concept of greening procurement, we have the investors sitting here again, willing and ready to mobilize capital, but also having to demonstrate how they're mobilizing capital to this type of investments. That's a big tailwind. That's a very nice push in the direction that this group really is trying to achieve. And it's not the only motivator, but it's a very, very good motivator. You bring those two things together, again, procurement reform and mandatory disclosures and enhanced regulation, and I think we'll see a big sea change here.
Thank you, Evan. And Nelson, I think you might have heard that Kate Newman is online, so she's also put in the chat to say, great to hear, Nelson. Let us know of how WWF and the conservation community can help. So she echoes your words, Evans, right, of keen to support. And also we have Prasant online, so who also is a new board member, got elected onto the FIDIC board this year in Singapore, and also is one of our board liaisons as well for the Sustainable Development Committee. So he's also commented, Nelson as well, on the contracts committee, looking at going up to procurement and to ultimately watch this space as well. So that's fantastic to see, and that's I probably should acknowledge, you know, how we work across the committees to try and link up what we're doing and particularly drive these sort of initiatives, which will be keen. Look, there is a lot of people online, you know, just putting comments around emerging economies. And they kind of said, how do the panelists see these concepts applied in emerging economies, where the main need is the provision of infrastructure, not necessarily concern on the environmental impact? And we're probably seeing this play out even around the world, not even emerging economies, right? You know, the cost of geopolitical issues, the cost of living crisis and things like that, which is even playing out in many parts of our own world, right, to a certain point. I don't know who would like to start that, a response to that. Who's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I can kick things off
okay.
there. I mean, one of them, I'll just riff off Nelson's piece about, you know, the work that he's been doing with the World Bank, because I mean, you know, a lot of the finance in the emerging economies comes from some of the international development banks and the international finance institutions, and we know that in order for their funds to be released, they are now inserting, you know, climate and nature and other sort of guidance into how their funds get dispersed into the infrastructure projects. And so I see from that point of view, certainly the money that's talking here will be wanting to see these aspects considered and brought in. I think the other thing to consider is not necessarily more expensive to include nature-based solutions or nature-positive aspects to the infrastructure design process. So if there is, you know, a project going ahead in a country where there's simply not as much funding as there might be in, you know, a US or a Canada or an Australia, then that doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, we have to drop all the innovative nature solutions, because actually they could be really a really timely intervention. I think the struggle may be where, and I was talking to this a little bit, how do you integrate the digitization, the remotely sensed data points, some of the skills? Sometimes that might be an area where there's just some extra capacity and some requirements there needed, and I think that might be where we see some challenges. So that's also a common problem in you know, the advanced economies too. So I think the problems and the challenges to do with implementing nature-positive infrastructure and nature-based solutions aren't easily divided into north and south challenges. I think it's more to do with things like what we've actually discussed in terms of the next steps. It's to do with really accounting for nature well, integrating it through procurement and standardization approaches, and then the approaches, then the success will flow from that. I think the biggest thing that we need to get through is the training and skills in order to be able to bring these solutions in. I think that's probably where the biggest gap is, but that's not just in the countries in the south. I think that affects some of the other countries as well. So that's just my penny's worth on that one.
Thanks, Robert. Nelson, you were going to originally say something.
Well, let's hope my system is still working. Can you still hear me loud and clear? Yes,
we can. Yeah.
Let me just build on Robert's comments. The World Bank are now putting a new procurement process called rated criterion. So they're moving away from the hard, you know, black and white on, you know, just quality. They're looking at rated criterion that focuses on sustainability. This is one of the reasons why they're picking up. There are 3 points I want to pick up. And Robert, you're absolutely right. The MDB are really meant to be catalysts for private injection coming into projects. And if the MDB are now calling for ESG criteria to be built into it, most of the private equity firms are already actually making that calling. I happen to be on a private equity firm in Africa, and when they go through their assessment, the ESG element of it becoming real. Now, I remember in Graham's speech earlier on, he was making reference to the EY report where we have this 63 trillion gap. But the biggest part of that, if I remember that report quite clearly, is in the energy space. And in the energy space, the biggest demand that is coming through is about making sure we address the ESG agenda. So the nature-based solution is coming into that. And Robert, you're absolutely right. Yes, for every one dime that the MDB put into it, there's a multiple of that comes into the private equity. And most of them are looking into the BlackRock. All of them are looking to this ESG. And there's a huge opportunity for our industry along that space to bring our ability to build capability, to training, to development. And the biggest joke somebody was saying to me 2 weeks ago, do we need more green engineers? And I said, we already have more green engineers. What we need to do that is just make sure at least we can put them in the process where people see the value proposition. So it's not costing more, but it means we need to be more diligent, we need to be more selective, and to make sure that the projects we are backing are those projects that can address not only nature-based, but really help us to achieve towards which is about the net zero. So the banks are looking at it carefully. The private sector are looking at it carefully. And in fact, most of the private sector are really keen to make sure any project they back up is really address this sort of sustainability agenda. And nature-based solution is really top of the agenda. So I do believe those recommendations that was coming through from Robert as to the next chapter are the real thing. And I'm really pleased that the relationship with WWF, as Evan said, is strengthening, is going on. There is no back end to that. There's a lot of things that we can do together. And it's really about being targetful, getting industry to support us in what we want to achieve. So I echo your comment, Robert, and I do believe there's a lot we can do in the future. Back to you, Tracey. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. Actually, there's a follow-on question there from Jeff French. So a former past president, and Robert, our Scott Wilson days, right? To a certain point. So well familiar to probably many people on this call. But Jeff asks, "It's great to hear what good organisations are doing. How should we deal with countries that are not taking these issues?" So he's bringing us up to a country level rather than an organisation level. Robert, COP will be interesting, right? Because it is going to be a global stock take, a COP, right, or where we all are around commitments. But I don't know you going to take that or?
Well, I mean, I think Jeff's absolutely right to bring that up at the country level. And I think what we will see as the nationally determined contributions get revised, following the global stock take, then I think what we'll see is that more of the projects that make up those nationally determined contributions outcomes over the 5-year sort of period will have a nature element to them. Jeff, I think that's going to be clear that sort of nature's on the agenda now. And so then, the organizations that help countries come up with their sort of climate action plans, you'll see nature front and center. And I think the other thing to bring up there is that it's not just the climate negotiations, but the nature COP. And Evan, you know a lot more about this than me, so I'll pass to you in a second. The Montreal Agreement really was a breakthrough in many ways that people weren't expecting how much ground it would cover and how involved industry and finance would be. To Evan's earlier point on the finance houses are really seeing clearly the nature agenda as a risk to investment, as a risk to supply chains in terms of impacts and dependencies on natural systems. So, Evan, I don't know if you've got some thoughts there as well. I know you were very involved in that process.
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning it, Robert. Exactly the point that I will make and would have made it. Let's not forget about the Biodiversity COP and the Kunming Montreal GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, does exactly as you referenced. It sets targets in a very meaningful way and commits countries to those targets. And the uptake, I think, early days, but still very encouraging. And it brings biodiversity and it brings nature closer to, maybe not yet on par with the global awareness and acknowledgement and commitments that we've seen out of the climate COPs in the past, but it definitely elevates the issue. And again, these are two interlinked challenges. And I think the GBF is a very strong motivator for those poor performers that participant in the webinar asked, there's a lot that needs to be done, obviously, to sort of move those poor performers or laggards up the ladder. And Nelson alluded to training, and that's another big piece of this. There's a lot of information dissemination that's required, certainly, a lot of training that goes along with that. And frankly, there's this issue of data provision. I think some things that prohibit entities, governments at the state, local, national level from acting in a particular way or for incorporating nature-related components into their infrastructure agenda is the absence of data, right? And data availability is crucial, and making platforms available for governments, for investors, for the engineering community to have a better understanding, of the red flags, of the risks, of no-go areas is still something that's really required. And frankly, that's where an organization like WS Value Add is. It's the provision of data in a sort of neutral, non-competitive space to allow for better uptake, better appreciation, and better understanding, of how to deploy resources most effectively and not to work against nature and conservation related goals. So still a lot of work to do, but absolutely, I think the GBF and the biodiversity COPs are important frameworks to help advance that agenda.
Anything to add?
Oh, Emily.
Sorry, the only thing to add that basically just repeats kind of the points that are made to the previous question comes down to financing. If the big kind of financing institutions are going to change the way that they, change their investment criteria, then that's going to have a big impact in how countries or organizations will be forced to basically kind of start to incorporate these types of solutions or change the normal practices that they've been working towards. So yeah, just to link back to that.
Thanks, Emily. I don't know if it's a continuation of that conversation, but Nicholas has put in, and Nelson, you probably started his point, Nelson's point, while interest from the public sector is great, did the panel agree that dollars from commercial entities is more sustainable? As a UK resident, one is more aware of the flaky commitment from government. Statement, comment, we all agree.
Tracey, do you want my input on that?
Do you want to pass a comment or no comment?
Well,
No.
I'll chip in if you allow me. I don't want to, steal it from the panel. Yes, I think the issue about, flaky comment from government is always an issue. I mean, you may take the UK situation and says, there's a lot of issue about HS2, reversing the decision, and all of that is actually, they play the game. But actually, I think the point that Jeff really raised earlier on is more of a concern to me, in the sense that in the developing country, you always have the challenge about people are desperate for just having infrastructure, and doesn't have to be green, or nature-based solution doesn't have to be incorporated. I think Emily is absolutely spot on. For those who are sitting as chair of investment committee in most big projects, they're now asking this question about what is the government commitment to this, and how the policy can be put together to make sure when those projects are going through, that what the promise at the end is actually delivered. And so that's a big challenge, for developing country. But I've seen increasing country in Africa and Middle East moving into that, coming back into UK and Europe. I think perhaps to some extent, more and more European countries are looking favorably along this area. I think we have a little bit of challenge in UK, if I can talk about that. But I suspect that, there is a full commitment. I do remember, maybe 10 years ago, they have 20% of their energy, which is renewable, and now it's nearly close to 40%. So the baseline is moving. But the key question from, what I call, nature-based solution, it has to be poked in. So more communication, more training, more development, and more education is going to be the key to unlock not just the engineers, but also, people who are in the planning process and people who are at the government level. And I think we need to make sure that all our communications across the board. That would be my thought. So any support we can do, we can get from, WWF or other key stakeholder is something we relish within FIDIC. I'll be quite happy to support that. Thanks, Tracey.
Thanks, Nelson. So we've about 5 minutes left in Q&A before we hand over to Alfredo. So maybe we'll go on a quick fire round of some other questions which are going. All right. Where do you think the key opportunities to properly embed nature in infrastructure development lies? Who wants to quick fire round on that? Emily?
The start. This is one of the additional chapters that we have had feedback on from those who have kind of read the document as well. It's kind of trying to come up with kind of looking at the project life cycle and trying to identify kind of the best entry points for incorporating nature-based solutions. So that is something that we are going to be looking at and could propose for, if it's not version 2, possibly version 3 of the document. But yeah, really good question, and yeah, we'll be interested in hearing the listeners' kind of response to it as well, where they think.
Great, there's lots of questions picked up a little bit around. I mentioned on this call about training, right, and things. Do you want to pass any comment about that, particularly from FIDIC's perspective?
Yes, I can do. I mean, FIDIC has established FIDIC Academy, which is its training, if you like, it brings all its training under one place. FIDIC has always done training, so I should emphasize this isn't something that's new, but increasingly you are seeing courses being developed that are targeted towards net zero business practices, best practices, because these things are being embedded. I mean, I think some of what the panelists have said actually resonates quite well, is that not just in procurement, not just in sector, not just in skills, it's a change of mindset of how we move forward. And even when we talk about financing with this, actually, if you're standing still, you're moving backwards. The world around you will change. So insurance is going to price risk differently in the climate era in 5 years' time. The price that's given to land, I mean, a lot of developing countries actually use land value capture to turn around and develop infrastructure. That's something that traditionally wasn't used in Europe. That will change. So the skill set is evolving as we move forward. And if you're standing still or you're not thinking about these questions now, the finance will move around you. And as was alluded to earlier, government does provide some security, and it does provide some levers to turn around and unlock finance. But there's also the shift by the private sector, and the private sector will send money where it believes that it can make returns and where things are good. If you're talking about advanced finance mechanisms like land capture and things like that, if you're valuing nature and if the outcome is a better infrastructure asset, then that value is captured. So you have an income stream. And so I think all of the skills around not only the nature and net zero, but actually how we communicate it across to clients, to procurers, even to end users, because fundamentally, let's be honest, if your customers and the general public are demanding green infrastructure, it will happen faster. So I think the whole thing has got to shift in one go, and that is where we're starting to see FIDIC Academy expand out its courses into areas that actually are more the softer skills and the skills we're going to need as we move forward.
Thanks, Graham. And look at Anil has put in the chat that a new FIDIC Academy course called Fundamentals of Net Zero will be released during COP28. So look out for that. That's quite exciting. There's probably two big questions here, and they probably can be merged into one. Basma's put in that where do you think the key opportunities to properly embed nature in infrastructure development lie? But there's another question here, right? And I actually think it's interesting that to say, a lot of this is nothing new, right? You know, what exactly are the key takeaways of the new thinking in infrastructure development? Environmental, social, and governance issues have long been talked about and not necessarily new. I suppose the point is, how do we progress, right? What do we need to do to truly progress? I mean, Robert, we've been in this field 30 years, right? You know, to a certain point, doing what we're doing. Many of us have been to a certain element.
I think, Graham, were you about to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, whilst the issues I talked about, I mean, if you trace the sort of climate and origins of net zero, you can go back 120 years when we started discovering some of these aspects. And the real political discussion started realistically in the late 70s, early 80s. And if we look at now, we do have a lot of commitments from countries to try and hit the 1.5 degree target. And so I do think things are changing. There are shifts in finance. You've seen some of the big sort of private finance companies and investment bodies saying that they're shifting their capital away from traditional products. And I mean, I'd like to almost leave people with a sense of we can do this. We've had global issues before, like the ozone hole, where actually concerted effort by countries unitedly across the globe did make a change, and we can turn around and address it. And I'd like to think that actually we shouldn't be looking at this as a problem necessarily all the time, but actually this is something we can solve, and this is something we can hit as we move towards net zero. And things like the playbook help us take that journey and take the journey quicker.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and also riff off one of the points that Evan was making around the increasing disclosure requirements in this area. So that's a big shift that we've not seen before. I think over the next couple of years, 2024 and 2025, we're going to see such a sort of harmonization and standardization of corporate responsibility and corporate sustainability disclosure requirements. Just to name a few, we've got the California new requirements coming out. We've got the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which will apply to a number of major companies from next year, and then lots of companies that trade in the EU region and have business in the EU, so not just EU-based companies, will be required to report on their nature impacts. At Climate Week, we had the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures released in its full version for the first time. Now, if everyone remembers, the climate version of that, TCFD, started off as a voluntary piece of guidance. That's now a mandatory requirement in many jurisdictions around the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of the nature aspects of TNFD being brought into mandatory requirements in terms of how companies report on their impacts and dependencies on natural systems. And so I think there's a big shift, as Graham says, and things aren't what they were. At the same time, we've got a recognition that the biodiversity crisis has got a lot worse, right? We're losing species at a horrendous rate. We're losing habitat at a horrendous rate. And these natural systems, we're going to need to rely on them to help combat the impacts of climate change. So as a society and for our own economic, well-being, we need to be looking at how we can conserve and integrate these natural assets into our economic and hard infrastructure systems. Otherwise, the future's looking pretty bleak. We're already moving into what looks like a 3-degree warming world, which will put our natural systems under even further stress. So there's a lot to do, and I certainly think it's a different picture than it was even a few years ago.
I think as we have hope. Right, I'm going to hand over. Evan, I'm going to go because I think you need to probably have a bit of a last say. And before we've probably about 4 minutes, but you don't have 4 minutes, you have 30 seconds. And there's a question for you, which fundamentally says, what is it like, working with the partnership with FIDIC as someone from an environmental organization?
Look, as I mentioned at the outset, and thank you to whomever asked the question, I really feel like the power of these two organizations is our global reach. We have many, many shared objectives. The engineering community sort of can imagine the future state of the world here, and the conservation community, I think, can help direct and deploy resources to achieve many of the things that we've been discussing. So this has really been a fantastic partnership. I'm grateful that we have made the connections, have been so effective in working together with the SEC and with AECOM as our technical partner, and I really think this is limitless. There's, as Nelson rightly noted, there's really no back end. So it may be perceived by folks on the call as a bit of an unusual partnership, as a meeting of two organizations that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see together. But I think some of these issues and that we've been discussing necessitate new and unexpected partnerships. So it's been fantastic, and I look forward to continued collaboration.
Thank you, Evan. All right, I'm eating in jail for this time. Right, we have the final poll. If we put it up, while the poll is up. So this is the question. Rank the following benefits in terms of importance when implementing nature-positive infrastructure solutions. So biodiversity, carbon reduction, improved resilience, environmental benefit, economic benefit, and social benefit. So we quickly go through that. I'll just, before I hand over to Alfredo, just say again, thank you to the panelists. I was getting a bit concerned. We spent about 45 minutes in the Q&A. I was a little bit concerned halfway in that we were going to have ad-lib, but as we know, we could go on for a long time on this conversation, and we will continue the conversation. Okay, biodiversity. Okay, again, I don't think many surprises there. That's fantastic to see everyone responding to that. Alfredo, I will hand over to you to close this out. And Robert, we look forward. I was just saying a couple of things. The playbook is in the chat. The link is there. Robert's going up to COP28. We'll see lots of posts from Robert while he's there. And this is a continuation of this playbook. So watch out. There's got to be further chapters, further development, and we need everyone's input into that. So thank you and good night from myself here in New Zealand. So thank you, Alfredo.
Thank you, Tracey. Thank you, everyone that took part to this webinar. I see that the discussion was very interesting, and thank you also for all the participants that gave their comments and questions in the chat. And just to close with one word, I think that it's everything is a matter of resource. We have to stop consumption of resources because we are lacking all the resources of our planet, and we have to stop, and we have to put resources into this process, because for sure this is not a cheap way to reach these targets. It's expensive. It's different from different places in the world, and by this way it's going to be this project, these big projects, these flagship projects have to be used to enforce people and government to put resources on this this approach, because it's not something that can be done at the same cost of the existing projects. And this could be the real challenge for emerging projects, for places in the world where the local situation is not that close to the targets that it is in different places in the world. I suppose there will be some slides here remaining the next meetings, next conference dates, next webinar. You can find every information on the website, but we are going to have a new webinar in December, and the next week the conference for international users, contract users in London, and at the end you can find on the website all the information that you can need and all the relevant documents. And that's it, I guess. Thank you very much to everyone for participating to this webinar. Thank you to the speakers, and see you in the next occasion. Thank you very much to everyone.